Thank you. Welcome to the Project Governance Group meeting and a step back into the future. I'm chairing on behalf of Nobby because he's Zooming. There's no intention of a takeover here.
Yeah, there is.
We've received one apology from the Mayor, Sir Tim. Are there any others? Note the apology. No. One notification for urgent general business. Is that correct? And
Is there?
Is that?
No, that was in the minutes of the last one.
minutes, the last one, sorry.
Yep.
Health and safety, nothing to report. Michael? Can we please turn to the minutes of the previous meeting?
I think that that noise on Zoom is the chickens at Nobby's place.
Oh, you're right.
It's
Time to roost, haven't they?
yeah.
That was a foul comment. I'm sorry.
We had it at the mayoral forum, and every time Nobby put his speaker on mute, the noise went away.
Okay, can we turn to the minutes for the meeting held on the 3rd of March? Are there any corrections or comments? Would somebody like to move them as a true and correct record?
I should do that, Chair.
Councillor Lewis,
Yep.
seconded.
Yep. Leslie Soper.
Thank you, Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Right.
Carried. Can we move now to the Project Secretariat report? Oh, sorry, minutes arising in actions. Were there actions from the minutes?
No.
No.
I think they're all covered
Yeah.
in one way, shape or form.
Right, can we go to project update? Jane?
Look, obviously the main thing on the agenda is the legacy report. We need to have a discussion about that. Then we need to confirm dates for the next PGG. And
Excuse me,
taking
can I
report.
ask, could all participants on Zoom please mute except for the person speaking, because we seem to be getting feedback. Can't hear Jane. Try now,
Can you hear me
Jane.
now? Is that
Yep.
better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so in item 2, you see 4 bullet points. These are the things we need to cover as we move through this. The legacy report, the dates to take the report through to council, note a couple of extra project risks and transferring the residual risks after this group finishes and the future outcomes to the Risk and Assurance Committee. In terms of the legacy report, I will work through these bullet points just quickly. The most important one's probably the top one. There is a missing piece of the jigsaw, and that impacts the results or the final report. These things are all completed now. However, the writing up of the outcomes from the impact survey, Bruce's wrap-up review, and a couple of questions in the residents survey still has to be completed and the analysis done. If I could just say, I've had some feedback from Lindsay, which I agree with, is that the learnings in the report itself need to probably go up closer to the front, and the executive summary needs to cover them in some depth. We'll do that, but once we've got this extra piece of information. Second bullet point, as we've moved through it, you'll see the shape has changed. There's been a lot of iterations going on, but hopefully it makes more sense how it is. Third point was something which you asked us to cover last time, and that was, have we done what we said we would do in terms of all the resolutions? So in Appendix F in the report, we've listed the resolutions. That's the original 28 in December 2020, and just noted actioned or otherwise against them all. There's only 3 that we believe haven't been completed or carried out as wished by council for various reasons. 2 of them relate to the unsuccessful attempts to put arrangements in place between the mayor and the deputy mayor. And the third one was there was to be a workshop, but that turned into reviews. Fourth bullet point, the mayor's support group will operate outside of the working together framework. When we get to it, I've got a question on that, because you'll see in Appendix F, not Appendix F, I think it's another appendix. I'll tell you what it is closer to when we get there. We've reproduced the most recent framework, which you signed off in December, and that shows the mayor's support group in there. So we need to decide whether it comes out of the framework. Workshop scheduled for the 26th of April. And the final one's quite important for this group to realise that the legacy report is your report. It's how you capture the last 18 months and deliver a report to council. It will have a staff covering report, but that'll be very short on top of it. So just as I'd like you to bear that in mind. It actually says that at just under the purpose, I think it is, in the report. So, Mr. Chair, how do you want to deal with this big long document?
Well, look, I think we should just go straight into the legacy report and seek comments or any clarification in regard to the report itself, and then we'll come back to the rest of the agenda.
Right. So that's on page, just getting there.
Page 19.
Page 19. And when you see the final version, it will all be numbered and look nice and snazzy. So there we go. I think, do you want to just do a page turn rather than me shuffling on? Page 21.
So look, I'm not going to be a wordsmith, but I just asked the question. It reminds me of school when you say presenting a report card.
Right.
Can we just say presenting a report?
Clearly isn't.
My schooling time was not flash.
Fine.
Any others on 21? (22) Jane, I was just in the first piece before scene setting. I was just wondering whether there was no mention of the long-term plan.
Right.
I'm not sure that it had any focus in the time of the background.
No.
That's right. We were talking about the strategic.
Sorry, my apologies. Under scene setting, yes, you list a whole lot of things there.
Yes.
And I just thought, you know, if you look back at the Thompson report, probably the biggest criticism was actually the
long-term plan, right?
Yeah, and I just wondered whether that was the right place. But somewhere in the document, I just thought it should have some emphasis about the success. It does later on, but I think more up front. Any others on 22? 23. Is it material to mention that only one of the ELT at the time was a resident in Invercargill?
They weren't actually the ELT, insofar as it was very much an interim. It was an acting, so there was a lack of a permanent ELT.
I think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yep, no, that's
and maybe we'll call it interim. That's better.
Just
I
on
think
page,
it's important, Jeff, that we note those arrangements, because it was a sort of the receiving environment into which some of the issues were.
That's right. It's hard if nobody lives there.
Chair, just on page 5 under the earlier actions, Jane, I provided a little bit of feedback about my concern that in that section, some earlier actions and some subsequent actions were kind of mixed, and it was hard to work out what was going on.
Yep.
You've rightly pointed out.
That.
Yeah, you've rightly pointed out that the chairs group was formed at the time that the committee structure was changed. My point really was that it was the terms of reference that came late,
Yeah.
as part of the working together thing program.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry.
Page 24 or 6. Cool. 25. 26. 27. 28. 29. Now this is where you got the working together, phase 2 updates.
That's right, and that's an earlier version, but we put that in because it's more comprehensive than the one we've got now.
Yeah. And it's relevant to the time. 30. 31. 32. 33. 34.
Yeah, on 34, Jane, I don't want to be a wordsmith either, but under risk in the second paragraph,
Please
Yes.
see.
the second sentence of that second paragraph.
Yes, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well done.
Deliberate
35.
error.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Sorry, you're right. 35.
Yep.
36. So, Jane, I just had a note here under learnings. I think one of the things that which created quite a bit of debate at the start was that the establishing of the working committees was whether they were to be chaired by officers of the organisation or chaired by councillors.
Yeah.
And I still sort of think that that was a really important decision in terms of the process going forward. And we don't sort of mention that in terms of the learnings. I just think somewhere there should be some mention of saying putting councillors as chairs and being part of the working groups was a critical part of getting things done.
Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree on that because it was a bit of a step change when
Yes.
that decision was made.
Yes.
37. 38. 39.
Oh, sorry, me again.
Yeah, sorry, Richard.
Sorry. So I just wonder, and so 39, let me just make sure I'm up. So this is the what we could have done better.
Yes.
Yes.
I wonder if there is an opportunity just to reflect on the point at which DIA sent the letter down and whether something should have been done earlier to address, if there's a place where we can sort of consider, and maybe it's the learnings for the sector, but how do you identify issues early before DIA needs to get involved?
Right.
And
That's an interesting call, Richard,
Yeah.
because there are probably many councils that could be in that position.
yeah, I'll look. So
could be quite a
Yeah.
political statement to say what it is that constitutes, a problematic council.
and I think that's exactly the challenge that we need to put out to the sector, and it's one of those areas where Invercargill could, potentially provide some real leadership to the sector on this. Typically, our challenges are swept under the carpet of just free and frank political banter and things like that. And it's when it gets to the point where it's a real challenge, it's often too late. So I'd be really interested to read some reflections on, how we've got elections coming up for almost every council around the country in October. What advice can we give to mayors and councillors as they get into those first 6 months on how to identify when things aren't going as well and what steps could they take? It might be a separate piece, but I think this is a valuable opportunity to include that in here.
So Richard, when you say that, were you going to offer some suggestions as to what those steps could be? I mean, would it have been a mayoral responsibility? Would it have been a risk and assurance responsibility?
Yeah, great point, Leslie. I'm happy to workshop some ideas around how we approach that. Although this is very much how it's not how DIA views it, but how a council should identify it. A good example would be, if you're in your first couple of meetings of the new triennium and all of a sudden code of conduct issues are coming up, I think there needs to be the ability for a council to actually just step back and go, hold on, what's going on here? Have we prepared ourselves properly to be an elected council? Is something genuinely going wrong, or are we missing the point of the tools that we have available? Yeah, so Leslie, it's good. I'd be happy to help support something in there.
I'm just wondering whether that leads into more comment about the worth of an induction program and for learnings for the sector being that it is extremely important that your council induction program is absolutely thorough at the beginning of the term, and that all councillors are given the chance to identify issues and so forth. Just thinking about if we're saying this is part of the learnings for the sector, and we are going to put in something like that, I just think it needs to be some meaty reflections.
And look, I'd just add to that, one of the things that made Invercargill stand out from other issues at the time a couple of years ago was that once we did put everything out on the table, there was what I felt was genuine and honest reflection from most of the councillors on what the situation was and what their role was in that. And I think that's where Invercargill got onto the right platform. So yeah, I think you're on the right track there.
Can I just add a bit in here, please, Richard? I support what you're saying, Jane. I would though think this should be an appendix. I mean, the legacy report, Richard, is about, and while I know there is a point we want to bring the learnings up, I think the ones that should be learnings around Invercargill City Council itself. But having said that, it certainly has given me good cause to reflect what are, and you and I have discussed, Richard, what are the warning signals? And so, Richard's number one report, and indeed our own self-reflection when I first became involved, clearly show those flags. But the question is, should we and can we, and would it be helpful for the sector to have those generalised? Because I think, at personal view, yes, they should be. So I would like to see that. I'm happy to have that. Well, sorry. I would be comfortable if it was included in the legacy report, but I think it's a separate piece that would flow on from it rather than it be.
Fair point. I'm happy with that.
But I wonder if there's another way around it too, Bruce and Richard. We could capture all of that in the covering report and ask council to attach it as an appendix to the legacy report. Would that be a better process? We'll have a think about it and get it in some way.
I think it's better in as an appendix to the legacy report rather than a covering letter.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Chair. I'm just wondering if it's too late after several meetings to attack it. Can we preempt it by making sure all the councillors get some sort of documentation on their first meeting or acceptance into the council, outlining some basic principles to try to preempt wayward behaviour at ongoing meetings? Because if you're 3 or 4 meetings down the track and you've identified problems, then it starts to become an issue that we have to deal with, and feelings can get hurt and personalities coming into it. But if you have a definitive documentation right at the very start, you might preempt some of those problems.
Yeah, look, I think it does emphasise the importance of induction and those first conversations at a council level about how you're going to conduct yourself.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm just harking back to my own experience, and it is that no matter how well you script it, people are people, and personality issues and challenges will arise. So my kind of sense is flagging what those warning signals or flags are, like frequency of notices of motion, codes of conduct, just tension in the atmosphere. Some of the soft measures that we've talked about is probably what's worth considering. I mean, I think the induction stuff should be a given, but again, my experience is that no matter how well that is done, there's a uniqueness about the sector that almost ensures that interpersonal challenges will manifest themselves. It's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
And it's how you recognise those and deal with them when they get to the point that they're impacting adversely on the organisation. I think that we ought to be considering as a legacy.
Yeah, but these aren't things that are special. They happen everywhere. It can be in the tennis club.
It's just very visible here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But with respect, Mr. Chair, the tennis club doesn't get reports and get asked to make a decision on them and then actually decide not to make a decision, send it back for more information and bring it back for another decision that doesn't get a decision made on it, which is in essence what was happening with the stones and the shoe issues. My question back to Richard would be, what does he see the role of the DIA? Because the letter that came from the DIA wasn't the first exchange that had taken place between Invercargill and the DIA. And if he's thinking that there's some preemptive opportunities, then what's the role with the DIA as well?
Look, I think there's some really good points that have been raised, and probably this meeting is not the place to get into the realm of solving these problems. But Claire's point is a good one. I mean, we had early on we'd had Invercargill on our radar for a number of months, and there were a couple of things that just for us was a tipping point. I think most councils don't realise that DIA quietly just monitors things in the background just to understand we have all sorts of ways that we gather information about councils. But at the end of the day, it's councils need to be left to address their own issues. I think the key point in these learnings are around how do councils, step back, have a look at what's going on and say, actually, maybe there's something we need to address here. I think, and on reflection of this discussion, I think Bruce is right. This is something that should be appended to the report rather than included in the report. And I think it needs a bit of careful thinking around how we land this to be really effective and something that the sector can actually take away and use. I've got some ideas, and so I'd be happy. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but if we had a small group, we might consider how we actually set that out. And but I don't want it to. It could potentially become bigger than Ben-Hur, and we don't want it to take over from the focus of what this legacy report is about.
Yep.
But I do think this is a great opportunity, so I'd be happy to be involved in something to help get that along.
So look, we'll agree to extending in terms of an appendix. Probably call it Appendix A. Give us some rather than Appendix F, and that can I suggest that Richard, Jane, and Mr. Mackenzie's quite good in this area. Is there anybody else interested in just having a brief discussion?
I better put my hand up for that.
Okay, thanks, Bruce.
Because as a person that deals with a good number of codes of conduct, I probably can add some insight.
Thanks, Bruce.
I think it would be good to keep it to a small group, but I also think if it's going to be written as an appendix, that it does need to have some clear steps as to if this is identified, how does a council then deal with it, and whose responsibility that becomes. Otherwise, it's just going to be another bit of history. I think if we're going to put it in an appendix as something useful for the sector in the future, it definitely needs to have some fairly clear reference to, once identified, there are some clear steps and trigger points that a council can take, or that a mayor can take, or that the DIA can take on the request of the council, whatever route. I think it definitely needs that to be part of it.
Again, great points, Leslie, and it makes me think that this needs to be non-council specific. So talking it's not referring specifically to Invercargill, but using various examples. I wonder if there might be an opportunity once we've got this sort of starting to shape up to bring someone from LGNZ or somebody in as part of that with their view around what potential pathways are. I think that's really important, that councils realise they have a suite of things that they can reach out to help them address these things as they come up.
Councillor Clark, Nobby?
I'm not sure where we're heading with this. So if I use another analogy, which is a field I've worked in, which is child abuse. So the issue is when you've had a child abuse case and you have to take some serious action, like picking up a child and taking him into care, one of the processes that follows from that is to backtrack and say, were there early intervention signs that we should have responded to, or did we leave it too late and we got into a more formal process? And I'm not sure that if I think about the child abuse case, that we go back to the parents in the case and say, well, you know, what could we have done, or what should you have actually done earlier on to avoid getting into this formal process, which in our scenario is the DIA intervention. I think it's for the people outside the Invercargill City Council area, which is the Janes and the Bruces and the Richards and so on, and maybe the EAs, to do some background work to say, well, okay, our legacy report comes forward from Thompson and he comments back from where he was sitting. But there is a bigger picture of how would we avoid it and what framework would we have. So for argument's sake, would DIA, if they were watching council generically, have a mechanism that allows them to tap into, say for argument's sake, a mayor in the city to say, look, we're getting a few issues of we're uncomfortable, some of the rhetoric in the media is not good. You've had 2 or 3 successful codes of conduct. We've got poor attendance or uptake by elected members on some issues. And that would allow a competent mayor, and I use that word but tongue in cheek, to be able to deal with it as an early intervention program before DIA would actually have to get involved. So I think it's a very important piece of work, but I'm not sure that given where we landed and what we've subsequently done, that we're in the best position to go back into that early intervention area, because it begs the question, well, if you can sit here now and give the country guidance on early intervention, why didn't you activate it in the first place? So I think we should use the advisors we've got around us, which are those people that I listed out, and the elected members should stay clear of this, and even staff should stay clear of it, because it is a system-wide issue. I mean, if you look at Dunedin recently, major flare-up last week over a double vote on whether they joined a breakaway Three Waters group, iwi walking away from council, some members absent and some not voting, and that got really messy. So that was, I guess, a flashpoint that DIA would pick up on. But then the other issue about early intervention is not necessarily flashpoints. Sometimes they can be overall drifts that you can see a council's reaction and the way they're governing going downhill, and you try and get them before you get to the flashpoint where it gets really messy. So I'm very in favour of doing it. Not sure we should attach it to this piece of work. I think it should be separated, but it could be a good piece of work to go forward on, I guess.
Thanks, Nobby. Thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think Nobby's raised some really good points. Why don't we get out this little group together and do a bit of scoping, and then we can make a call or a recommendation as to where it best sits.
Yeah. Thanks, Richard. So we're happy to do that, and we're just leaving it in terms of where it finally fits, and let's leave that with the group to come back with a recommendation.
Can I just clarify, Jeff,
Yes.
that yes, we'll do that. It'll have to be done quickly because this report needs to be finished by the end of next week in a shape to be, because we've got Easter and Anzac Day and so on and so forth. Would you expect that the group gets together, comes up with a way forward, and maybe circulates to the PGG by email to get their sign off?
Yes, but you may come back and say, look, we think this is actually a bit bigger than Ben-Hur, and that we should actually do it separate from the legacy report, but attach at a later stage.
Okay, we'll come back to the whole team and.
Not sure.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm asking who are we doing it for? Because Invercargill City is funding. Okay, let me just bring it right back to the dollars and cents.
Yeah.
You know, sorry, Julie, one of the things that that's what Claire said, one of the things that I would propose if I'm part of that group is that DIA actually do this piece of work, because it kind of picks up Nobby's point that it's somebody who's in the helicopter looking at the overall process. It's catalysts and the responses who's best placed. I feel some diffidence about recommending its incorporation into this, but look, just supporting Claire's position really. Let's see how it plays.
Good points. Yeah.
You got any money in the bucket, Richard?
As always.
Oh, funny man. So can I just confirm that we're looking at myself, Bruce, Jane, and Lindsay? Was that the 4? Was there
Yes.
somebody else?
That's
Okay.
the 4. Thanks, Richard.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, but is there going to be some scope? Because I'll put it bluntly, I'm not authorising these people to invoice Invercargill for a piece of work that Invercargill isn't requesting.
Right.
I'm happy to say let's give it an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But beyond that, this is, in your words, bigger than Ben-Hur. And I think Nobby might want to make a point.
Yep, and just like to contribute to that, Jeff. And it's not just a money issue for me. I think that DIA, as part of accepting our legacy report, should scope some work going forward about, how to do early intervention with things so they don't have a Tauranga or a Invercargill situation. So they should be the lead on that. And that's not to say that we just have the number of people you've suggested there. It may be that Richard might want to pull in Sam Broughton or somebody else in a more in a different council that might be dealing with things in a different way. So we get some learning about how do we avoid getting to Tauranga, how do we avoid getting to Invercargill, and what are the key things that we'd want to pick up on as an organisation. And that could be part of induction going forward. We have too many codes of conduct, we have too many negative media reports and so on, then they're red flags that somebody who sits over and above us should do it. I mean, one of the key issues is when I think back on these red flags is often these red flags are from people that are pushing the barrow out on the around democracy or freedom of speech, and the Mayor and I have both been caught up in that. And so there is a very fine line sometimes when you're in the heat of debates or in the heat of issues, sometimes sit more strategically and see what's going on. It tends to be an issue by issue basis. So I think it should be something that the DIA leads, and as Claire says, funds. It wouldn't be a big exercise for a government department to say, hey, actually, if we put some money and effort into this, in the next triennium we might avoid having to spend the amount of money that DIA has already committed to this project and probably to Tauranga and some others as well.
You're right, Rob. You're right, Nobby. It could be a cheap investment for the DIA.
Yeah.
It could be.
So look, let's agree to, and thanks, Claire, on the basis that the group get together for an hour or so, scope out what they think is some value and come back with a recommendation. And that recommendation may be that it goes to a wider extent in terms of the DIA.
Sounds reasonable.
Richard, got a hand up?
No, he's now got a thumbs up.
Oh, righto.
Change.
Yeah, it was
Excellent.
supposed to be a thumbs up. Hey, look, I'll set up the meeting for, I'll try for later this week or early next week.
But Bruce has now got hands up.
Bruce?
Yeah, look, I just,
Slow
I think what we have done is developed a bigger than Ben-Hur from a good suggestion, which is I still think that in this report, there is a chance for a small piece, which is a valid part of it, self-reflection, because I think that's what it is ultimately, Nobby, which is that we're just reflecting were the signs there originally. And I think we can, I mean, that's part of really, I guess, what was reflected in some of that early analysis. And I don't think in terms of the learnings that there's a problem with a paragraph that would reflect, look, we, Nobby, you actually listed them, what we were experiencing, and the learnings are simply, if this is happening in your place, be worried. I think it would be the sort of the colloquialism of how we would.
Bruce, you're right. I think there's coming right back to the start of the conversation raised by Richard. Yes, I think there should be a paragraph that refers to it, and it might refer to ongoing work, or that outside of the legacy report there will be further work being done.
Mr. Chair, it could be in the cover report, and it could refer to it for the purposes of pointing the DIA to say you might want to think about picking this up and doing some more work.
But let the group get together and scope that as well. But I think to devoid the report of any comment would be wrong.
Yeah.
And Bruce, you're right. There should be at least a paragraph about it. But we'll leave the Ben Hur part to DIA team.
Thank you.
Right, page 39. I've just got one on the communications and media management. There's no reflection on the current structure, but if you went back and looked at the time, I think solely blaming the continuous focus of personalities and commentary between individual elected members wasn't all of the problem. I sense if we had probably had a comms strategy and had been probably more open about what the working groups were doing at the time, we may have had less of a problem. So my personal view is that it wasn't the lack of comms or anything, it was just the strategy around how to deal with this as a program from ICC probably didn't get the start it should have got. Yes, it got some focus because of personalities, etc. But I still think there was, I don't know how many conversations we had in the working group about what is the comms.
Mr. Chair, I'd put it slightly differently, and I'd say that one of the, I'll call it an affliction, but one of the negative points was that the comms was still very much structured in a historic way.
Yeah.
And although we knew we wanted to change it, there was a lack of leadership in the space to be able to make the changes, step changes that were wanted.
But I do think in sense of the learnings, if I was ever saying to another council about your process going forward, make sure you got your comms right at the start. There's no point in trying to get it right halfway through. And I just don't think that quite emphasises it enough, Jane.
Fine, I've got all these points, thank you.
Any others on 39? I'm not intending to go through the list of appendices, other than to say here is the list. You sure there's not a couple others we could add?
Chair, can I
comprehensive and international in scope as it is.
Yes.
Let's not go any further.
Lindsay.
Yeah, Chair, can I just comment on that? And it's probably for you, Jane, and it's a sort of a form over substance proposition. I am concerned that the readability of the legacy report is going to be overwhelmed by the attachments or the appendices. There's about 80 pages. We might end up with 40 pages of legacy report if we push. And just wondered whether or not there's another way of presenting the appendices so that the legacy report stands alone as a readable and accessible document, and that the appendices, potentially a volume 2 or something, sit there as a historical record of the relevant, supporting documents.
I'm sure we can do that.
I don't know whether it's just me or others share the concern that the messaging might be lost in the massive paper that we might end up.
I could help you. You could get rid of H for a start. I just think you really need to think seriously about what do you need as supporting documents to the legacy report versus a reference to the website where you can get it.
We did think about that, and we'll take these points on board, and I'm hoping that Lisa will put a thumbs up or whatever, because it will fall to how we present this, and I'm sure there's another way to do this. I think it's a good idea to have these all in one place, but they don't need to be. 2 documents is a good idea.
Yeah.
We'll sort that, because there'll be the impact survey, I think, to go on the end of it. And I'm hoping that you've changed your mind, Mr. Chair, about putting an Appendix A up front, because that would mean we'd have to change the later.
I just mean a bit further up the order.
Yeah, okay. We'll sort that. We'll come up with something.
Mr. Chair, I think there's a difference in the appendices. I think some of them don't actually add to telling the story, and no disrespect, but maybe H fits into that category.
It does.
Whereas I think that the governance review by Mr. Thompson actually greatly adds to it,
Yep.
and without it, the legacy report seems a bit, well, what went before? So I wonder if we actually need to seriously think about those that are, well, I think my father would have called them chaff, as opposed to those that really do add to the meatiness of the assessment and the legacy report.
Well, I put a note to myself, and I had the letter from DIA, Richard Thompson's report, not his bio, and then his 6 monthly report. I thought they were the three documents.
Yeah.
Happy with that. I sort of approach, yeah. Cheers.
And I think the others can be found
Yes,
in
yeah,
a particular
you
place.
list them as
but it's hard to read the legacy report without having read.
You have to have the Thompson report, and
Yeah.
I think for
Completeness.
giving some credence to the legacy report, the 6 month the
Yep.
second report is quite critical.
Cool.
But I think for all the other things like the charter, working together, framework, those sort of things, I think should be just a reference point to the ICC website.
One question, what about the one we've got as D, the self-assessment report?
Nope.
No? Okay.
I think you
Thompson
lose.
covers it.
Yeah, I just look. The reason I would argue, Jane, quite strongly on this is, I think the legacy report needs to stand on its own, and the more you have in appendices, the more it disappears.
Right.
I just
We can get round that, Jane. I mean, in terms of the self-assessment, there were 4 key points.
And we've got them in there, you're right.
They're in there,
Right.
and to the extent that the wrap-up will reference those as they must.
Yeah.
It's the 4 paragraphs which can be included in the text rather than as an appendix.
good point,
Right,
Bruce.
that's good.
Any other thoughts?
Nobby's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Nobby. This is like playing a game of chess, I have to tell you, having so many people on Zoom. Nobby, you got a hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Just going back to page 39, which is the comms area.
Yeah.
I was just giving some thought while you were going through the rest of the stuff there about the comms area. So I just want to reflect a few things there. I think our comms strategies was identified very early, and it seems to be the last thing that we're resolving. Well, second to last behind induction. And I think that's a learning that we need to learn, that when you're going into something like what we've gone through, we needed to have comms up front. Now, that's no disrespect to Lisa, because I know she's come late to this equation. And so that's one reflection I'd have. There's a very fine balance between the rights of our members to have a democratic voice and what gets into the media. We need to get a balance between, we should have got a balance between good news as opposed to always being reactive to negative news. But the thing that makes us quite unique, I think, and it should be in our legacy report, is that in defence of the comms, regardless of who was delivering it, is that we had a mayor that absolutely shot us in the foot 2 days after we got the Thompson report, sat in a media presentation and just basically criticised it. And ever since then, the group that's been there to support him hasn't functioned. And ever since then, every time we get a subsequent piece of updated about the progress we got, the mayor, who's the biggest profile we've got, unfortunately, just continues to criticise it. So one of the things that we need to identify, I guess, is if we had that scenario again, how would we take away that constant undermining of the work we were doing? Because it's been significant. And I'm not sure how you do that, given that you've got a mayor that's got a national or international profile. It's been very, very hard work, much harder than it should have been, I think.
The report
I
does.
sometimes sit here and think, you know, if we'd faced the Thompson report and our mayor had been Dave Cull, who I knew reasonably well before he passed, I think we'd had a much different pathway through what we've dealt with than if we'd had the current mayor.
And Councillor Soper.
Councillor Soper?
Just want to reflect that.
Yeah, thanks, Nobby. Councillor Soper?
Thank you. I was just actually going to say that Nobby's got a fair point there, that point does need to be perhaps a little bit more drawn out. But the other thing I was going to ask, we're finished with the discussion on the appendices and so forth, is where were you thinking of moving the learnings to in the report?
Mr. Chair, can I just ask Councillor Soper to identify which point she thought was a fair point? Because I think Nobby made a couple of points
just the difficulty of the mayor
Right.
undermining
Thank you.
the process is the point that I think perhaps needs to be undermining the communications process.
Thank
I think
you.
probably is a point that needs to be drawn out a little bit more in that communications area.
Look, shall we just deal with this point that Nobby's raised first? On page 26, Jane's captured, I thought, quite well, but you could argue not emphasised to the extent you're both raising, that on the 13th of November, the media were brought in for a briefing, etc., and the council was surprised by the mayor's chose to speak out against the council resolutions. It's sort of buried in the report. What you're arguing is we probably need to say something, even if it was under the comms part and the learnings, a bit more emphasising how that derailed it to a certain extent. Or derailed.
Exactly, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I think
Continue to do.
I acknowledge on page 26 it is there, but as you say, a bit buried in the report. If we're going to make that comment at the end and the learnings about communications, etc., my feeling is it does need to be drawn out here again that was a very definite element undermining the communication.
I think you can do it. I think you
and
can.
in fact, the agreement at that stage that we were all on one par and going to move forward.
I think you can do it well by the use of the word leadership vacuum as well, in the sense that it continually created a problem for the program going forward.
Yeah, but Bruce, sorry, Jeff, that's not strong enough for me.
I knew that, Watt. I knew as soon as I said it.
I mean, it's not a vacuum of leadership, because leadership can just be a quiet person or a person that's not well organised. I mean, this was quite a proactive program by His Worship to, at every single point, undermine. Look, I accept his right to have a voice, because I sometimes end up down this track as well, and it's a very lonely place sometimes. But when you're trying to work through an issue like we had with the DIA intervention, you can't afford to be undermining every step all along the way. It makes it really, really hard for other elected members and senior staff that are trying to be proactive and trying to get forward and trying to improve our image in the community, to have it constantly undermined.
Look, I absolutely agree. If the situation had been where the mayor had then said from the point of the report being accepted by the council and had led by saying these are the things that we need to do improve, would have been a different and faster process. And so for that reason, I think you're right. This is really hard for somebody crafting a report to word it in a way that doesn't relitigate the whole damn thing again too. So I think there's a balance there. But I take on, I think we should take on your comments as councillors of saying, look, at the end of the day, this could have kept derailing a problem. The solution by the lack.
I mean, it doesn't matter how much Lisa and Claire put out by way of positive news about what we're working here. If the mayor with his profile makes one-off statements, it just derails everything. Yeah. That's what people focus on. It was frustrating. I mean, look, I don't mind him having a voice opposed. That's his right.
Yeah.
I could easily have said at that initial media thing and said I felt a bit gutted by some of the polarising comments about me, but there was nothing to be gained by grandstanding on that. I just had to work my way forward.
Oh, look, and we're forever grateful, Nobby.
Well, we haven't finished the training yet.
No, I realise that. I'm just trying to be positive and get in the front.
Once the legacy report's out, I can do what I like now, because Richard will be dealing with it. We'll deal with it in Wellington.
We're going to hold it over.
Righto, can we?
You, mate.
Thanks, Bruce. Leslie, just come back. You raised the point around the appendix document.
Just if we're going to move the learnings, I'm just interested in where the thoughts were on where to move them to.
Sorry. Yep.
So the Royal We decided to accept all the feedback and then take it all together and do any reshaping. What we're hearing is a whole lot of stuff that will be very useful right up front in the executive summary. Don't forget we've got that to emphasize a lot of the points that you brought out today. So the answer is I don't know yet. But I think what I've heard is there's no what I call material changes to the layout other than that one, maybe moving up. So we'll give it some thought. But when you get the next version, it will have the executive summary in it, which may well address where things are. We'll have to reflect on this very good discussion today.
Thanks,
Fair
Jane.
enough. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
So are there any other comments in terms of the legacy report draft 2? Look, I think that was worthwhile discussion. Can we now move?
Just one, Jeff. I think it was either Leslie or Claire, I can't remember, one of the two of them did say about putting too many appendixes in. One of the things is that when people read through a report like this legacy report, it's about whatever number of pages long it is, a dozen pages long, and then you get the appendices run into 50 or 100 pages and go way, some of them go way back. When you've read the report, you've sort of lost a bit of the stuff that's at the front end. And so I'm just signaling that I think, like you said, Jane, the importance of that executive summary will be important, because otherwise often it's the last thing you read in a cluster of papers that tends to be fresh in your mind.
Yeah. Look, I've taken on board. We're down to 3 appendices now, and they're going to be in a separate volume in some way.
Cool.
Sure, thank you.
I think it's just as well as a draft report, because a chess report would be more drawn out, I think.
Righto. Number 4, future reporting against outcomes, Jane.
Look, it's as it is.
Yep.
I've got nothing to add to that. You'll see last time we added on a couple, and I'm looking at number 8, and Lisa's put a comment in there about what's been happening in March, and the organisation will continue to monitor that to make sure that we are proactive in communications.
Any questions around those comments? Number 5, draft work plan. I think we all agree to that.
Yep.
Budget update.
Nothing to add to that.
Project risk.
And that's the one we're suggesting that goes to the risk and assurance when we conclude. There's a couple added on at the end there too, 12 and 13.
Any comments? And we will accept the recommendation. This will move to audit and risk, or risk and audit post PGG.
Thank you.
Lisa, communications update, number 8.
Yes, I think things have probably moved on a little bit since that was written, particularly in regards to the Deputy Mayor. But yeah, that's it. Happy to take questions.
Any questions? I must say I'm getting quite positive feedback about Invercargill, about all the activity around the town in recent weeks, which is nice. Stead Street open again, is it?
It will be open by the end of this month.
Right.
If you wish to be positive about Stead Street, you would note that the scope of works has increased, and we are addressing stormwater issues there at the same time. I personally experienced having a cab ride to the airport and the cabbie telling me that it was a completely unnecessary piece of work, and by the time we finished our conversation, he was completely converted.
Well, I'd like to hear from the cabbie driver first. Okay, nothing more under 8. Can we go to 9 next meeting? So
yes, we shifted it to the 9th of May because there were competing commitments. So you just need to confirm you want to continue with that date or bring it back. The key one is probably all this work will have to be done to get it out to council for the workshop on the 26th of April. And then you recall last meeting with Nobby in the chair, we had a bit of a conversation about whether we needed an extraordinary council meeting to deal with this. I'm probably of the view we don't, but that's in the hands of the group.
Is it in the hands of PGG or in the hands of the council?
No.
PGG, I think.
PGG. So, Mr. Chair, let me make a bid to start with. If the council workshop is on the 26th, then Jane would have the 27th, 28th, Jane and others to turn it around. It could be in an agenda published on Friday the 29th for a meeting on the 4th. It keeps it moving, which I think was the original concern. And Wednesdays are the usual day for PGG meetings.
So are we missing 2 on the 4th? Is that the problem?
No, we're not.
We're not
We
now.
thought
Oh, that's
we
right. I
were,
read something.
but
Yes,
we're,
yeah.
but we're not
Yep.
now.
Let's go for the 4th. Is everybody happy with that?
And you need to tell us, just confirm council on the 23rd.
I can't do that. I'll have to refer to the chief executive.
Sorry, council on the 23rd of May, Jane?
Yes, so in other words, we don't have a special meeting to deal with this. It just goes to the normal
Be
council.
the 24th.
24th, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If you wanted it to go to council early, you could have an extraordinary council on the 10th when there is a PPP meeting. So if you wanted to keep
I would
it
have thought if it was all lined up, why wouldn't you do it?
on the 10th or the 24th?
Yeah. I think you have to give some room in case something comes out of the workshop, which we then refer to the 9th, which...
The 4th, we'll refer to the 4th.
Yeah.
You'd have overnight to...
Oh, righto. Yeah, no,
yeah,
still got
but
time.
you do have time.
Yeah. No, that sounds good.
I think there's another objective here, Claire and Jeff, which is actually what we want to do with the report and relative to the elections, which is clearly send it to Richard and get his response as well. So keeping the pace on is helpful in that. That I think we would appreciate a response out of the department earlier rather than later.
Cool.
You mean Richard me rather than Richard Thompson?
Yeah, I said Richard Hardy, sorry. It's your letter I want, mate.
So can we just unpick that a little, Bruce? You're suggesting that somewhere between the PGG receiving the report on the 4th and it going to council, you would like it to go to the DIA and for the DIA to get...
Sorry. What I was saying, what I was assuming, actually, sorry, I should be careful. You're checking my assumptions, which is good. So the 4th, the PGG is saying to council, this is our legacy report, please accept it. And I would have assumed on the 10th there would have been a cover letter saying, this is the final report. Our proposal is, or the resolution is, that we forward this to the department with a request that they comment, essentially clearing us, if that's the right word, relative to the original letter. All I'm trying to say is that will take some time for Richard and the team in Wellington to process, and we would ideally want that back reasonably soon. Dare I say it, free of the elections. Is really what I'm trying to get at.
So Bruce, if I was to continue that on, I would ask Richard a direct question. If council met on the 10th, would the department be able to respond by the 24th?
Yeah, I see no reason why I couldn't arrange to get something back to you by the 24th.
We would have been able to have given you something earlier, but the council resolution would come on the 10th, and that's the value of a special of an extraordinary meeting. Yeah.
No, and look, I will have been able to do some prep work before that anyway, so we should be able to turn it around that quickly.
Excellent. No, that sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Damn, I'm giving myself a heap of work to do.
I know, Richard. This is one of those Zoom calls you wish you didn't go on.
Chair, just in terms of your and my self-interest, there's another resolution that I'm looking forward to seeing on a council agenda, and that's the termination of our brief. Is that something, along with some potentially other wrap-up resolutions, that would go to the 24th as opposed to the 10th? What's you thinking, Claire or Jane?
No, I would have thought that the covering report on the 10th of May this is the legacy report from the PGG. Please receive it. The resolution we've just talked about, we recommend this goes to the DIA and we request a response by the 24th. And that would be where the termination clause goes to, I think.
Yeah.
Cool.
So-
Yeah, that's good. Excellent. Is there any other items that anybody wanted to raise? Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
I've got one, Jeff.
Oh, sorry.
Just to signal with you that you might need to chair the cluster of meetings
Yep.
going forward.
Yep. No, that's.
I've got an operation this Friday,
Oh, cool.
and we'll be off for a couple of weeks. And depending on the outcome of the pathology on that operation, I may need a further one as well. So I'm not quite sure about the landscape going forward and what urgent in a health system actually means. But I've got in quickly this time around, but it's not so well next time. So.
Okay. Best of luck, Nobby, and happy to chair the meetings to get through the end of the legacy report. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'll let you go and do something more useful. Cheers.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys round. Jane, I'm just about to give you a call, Jane.
She'll turn her phone off.